The night when the Roman legion marched on the city was unlike any other. There were no battering rams, no towers, no catapults, only silence, heavy breathing, and dull thuds of iron soles against the ground. By morning, only smoking ruins and the bodies of defenders remained of the city. How did they do this? How did they destroy fortified cities without siege engines, like a shadow erasing entire walls? Historians write that the Romans delivered such strikes during the late Republic era, between 87th and 40th years BC. It was then that legions learned to use the method of night capture through sudden tactical regrouping and precise signals from commanders. These were not insane attacks, this was a choreography of death, honed to the rhythm of breathing. Their main secret was that each soldier knew their place and movement even before the battle began. This order was called discipline. For ancient Rome, this word did not simply mean obedience, it was a code of survival. Without it, an army stretched out for 20 kilometers of march would turn into chaos. Imagine how, in complete darkness, legionaries moved in a column, not seeing each other, orienting themselves only by sound. Their commanders, centurions, walked along the ranks checking belts and fastenings. One centurion commanded approximately 100 warriors, and on his voice depended whether the city would burn by morning. Archaeologists found remnants of charred gates and fragments of ballistic arrowheads near the walls of ancient Nola. These findings show the city fell not from a siege, but from a sudden assault at night. According to Polybius, the Romans could march tens of kilometers in a day and attack immediately, giving the enemy neither time nor sleep. This art of surprise was called repentinum impetum, an instant strike. Its meaning was simple. The enemy should not even have time to realize that war had begun. Strikes on the gates, burning arrows, shouts in Latin, everything merged into a single wave that crashed upon the sleeping city. In this was not only strength, but also cold calculation. The Romans knew that fear destroys walls faster than battering rams. A city, seeing in the darkness burning torches and the gleam of helmets, surrendered even before the first clash. But what began as a strategy of intimidation, over time became an instrument of mass destruction. When the enemy did not surrender, the legion went to the end. Stones, spears, fire, and silence after. That very silence, about which Livy wrote, "After the Romans, neither a cry nor a prayer is heard," this silence was their true weapon. Not siege engines, not catapults, but the very certainty that no one would escape alive. And while the night smoke rose over the ruined houses, commanders were already preparing a new order to go further, to where new fires burned. When the first rays of sun touched the remains of burned walls, the legion was already far away. Behind them remained only dust, the smell of burning, and the dead echo of their steps. But the defeat of the city was not a matter of chance. Everything began long before the first strike. The enemy's demise was designed in Roman camps, with the precision of engineers and the coldness of surgeons. The camp, the heart of the Roman army. It was erected every evening, even if the legion stayed for only one night. These were not just tents. It was a fortified city with moats, ramparts, and watchtowers. Archaeological excavations near German Haltern showed each line of fortifications had the same width, about 3 meters, and the distance between streets precisely measured by paces. Every soldier knew where his tent stood, where the kitchen was, where the armory was. This was an order that transformed the chaos of the march into a mathematical system of war. The Romans called this order castra. Today one can say simpler, a mobile fortress. From these camps, legions emerged, like from factory workshops, already prepared killing machines. In each castrum there was one sacred line, the main street, leading from the gate to the center where the legion's standard, the signum, stood. When it was raised, the legion transformed into a single organism. Each warrior carried about 30 kilograms of equipment, armor, weapons, a mess kit, grain for 3 days, and stakes for fortifying the camp. The weight was enormous, but it was precisely this that made them invincible. A Roman soldier could march 25 kilometers in a day without losing formation. This march was called Iter Magnum, a great passage. Modern military trials show that even trained 21st century fighters rarely endure such a load without training. But the legionaries did not just march, they learned to kill in motion. Along the road, centurions conducted sudden drill inspections, changing formation, reforming into a wedge, instant halt. Every movement had to become a reflex, because on the battlefield, mistakes were not forgiven. When the night before the assault arrived, the camp turned into a beehive. Blacksmiths sharpened swords, cooks mixed spelt porridge, scouts drew the city's layout on the sand. In one of the excavated camps in Spain, archaeologists found clay tablets with drawings of fortifications, simple but accurate plans. This proves that attacks were not improvised, every city was studied, every wall measured. The Romans hated chance. If siege engines were absent, they compensated with speed and cunning. One such tactic was called subitus impetus, a sudden attack with the imitation of numerical superiority. Warriors lit fires around the perimeter, creating the illusion of a vast army. The enemy, seeing dozens of fires, believed they were surrounded and often surrendered without a fight. But the most terrifying part began when the enemy did not surrender. Then the ancient Roman tactic testudo came into play. This was not just a formation, but a symbol of their will. When warriors raised their shields above their heads and closed ranks into a steel box, enemy arrows clanged against the bronze like rain on a roof. This was a moving bunker carrying death. Tacitus wrote that during such an assault, the walls cracked from strain, not from the blows of battering rams, but because the Romans approached them closely, cutting out the lower stones with axes. One blow, a second, and now, beneath the wall, there was fire, smoke, and the clang of metal. The city burned from below, like a candle, and above, people suffocated from the heat. The legion did not wait for the order to retreat. If the gates did not yield, they walked over the bodies of their own. Polybius described how in Numantia the Romans stormed breaches, sliding on blood, yet not retreating a single step. And this is not hyperbole. Archaeologists found human bones, mixed with bronze armor parts, at the site of the assault. The centurion knew, if he showed weakness, 100 would perish after him. Therefore his reward was not gold, but the right to die first. In Rome they said, centurio ante omnes, the centurion before all. They were buried without honors, but the name of each was carved in stone, proof that they did not merely command, but led. While smoke rose above the walls, the legion commander, the legate, was already planning how to use the destroyed city. Sometimes it was left as a warning to neighbors, sometimes turned into a base. But always the same procedure followed. Spoils were divided equally, and victory was recorded not in a person's name, but in the legion's name. This system turned the army not into a mob of killers, but into a mechanism of power. And it was precisely this that allowed the Romans to burn cities overnight, not because they were bloodthirsty, but because they acted as one will. When thousands of people move in unison, even walls lose their meaning. And in this lay the true magic of Roman weaponry, in that its main blade was order. The Romans said, "Ordo vincit omnia," order conquers all. And it was precisely this order that turned night into their ally. When the hour of attack arrived, the legionaries moved silently, step by step, as if ghosts in bronze. Lights over the camp went out, signal horns fell silent. Only the officers, centurions and tribunes, knew the attack plan. The rest followed their silhouettes like shadows, confident that with the first movement a storm would begin. At the start of the night assault, the legion did not employ catapults or battering rams. Their weapons were speed and surprise. Polybius described that the commander gave a signal, short like the strike of a sword. One trumpet sound and the ranks came alive. From the darkness, torches rose, but not for light, but for fear. The city saw dozens of lights flash from the darkness, as if the earth itself had caught fire. This attack was called ignis nocturnus, night fire. Its meaning was simple, to make the enemy believe they were surrounded. Warriors shouted battle slogans, struck swords against shields, raised dust, and even if there were only a few hundred of them, it seemed as if an entire legion was advancing. Psychological warfare brought to an art form long before the term psychological operations appeared. When the defenders rushed to the walls, it was already too late. Dozens of legionaries in a dense testudo formation were already approaching the gates. Under the cover of shields, they poured tar onto the gate leaves and set them on fire. The flame temperature rose above 1,000 degrees, bronze hinges melted, and smoke choked the defenders. But not everything always went according to plan. In one of the campaigns against the Lusitanians in Spain, the enemy noticed the Romans in advance and opened fire with bows. Then Legate Quintus Servilius Caepio ordered the use of an agger, a temporary earthen rampart, an embankment that soldiers created from sandbags and shields. Within minutes they erected a shelter and continued the advance. This was an example of Roman engineering genius. They could reshape the very earth to shelter themselves from death. Engineering units were called fabri, craftsmen. These people did not fight, but the outcome of the battle depended precisely on them. They built bridges over moats, constructed ladders from spears, erected platforms so that infantry could approach the walls closely. Modern researchers find iron pins, stakes, and solidified lumps of tar at the sites of ancient battles, traces of these night operations. All of this proves the Romans did not need cumbersome siege engines when they could create them from readily available materials. During night attacks, signals were used, not visual but auditory. Legionaries distinguished 33 different trumpet sounds, each denoting an action: advance, retreat, regrouping. When the hour of attack arrived, the legionaries moved silently, step by step, as if ghosts in bronze. Over the camp, lights went out. Signal horns fell silent. Only the officers, centurions and tribunes knew the attack plan. The rest followed their silhouettes, like shadows, confident that with the first movement a storm would begin. At the start of the night assault, the legion did not employ catapults or battering rams. Their weapons were speed and surprise. Polybius described that the commander gave a signal, short like the strike of a sword. One trumpet sound and the ranks came alive. From the darkness torches rose, but not for light, but for fear. The city saw dozens of lights flash from the darkness, as if the earth itself had caught fire. This attack was called Ignis Nocturnus, night fire. Its meaning was simple: to make the enemy believe they were surrounded. Warriors shouted battle slogans, struck swords against shields, raised dust, and even if there were only a few hundred of them, it seemed as if an entire legion was advancing. Psychological warfare brought to an art form long before the term psychological operations appeared. When the defenders rushed to the walls, it was already too late. Dozens of legionaries in a dense testudo formation were already approaching the gates. Under the cover of shields, they poured tar onto the gate leaves and set them on fire. The flame temperature rose above 1,000 degrees, bronze hinges melted, and smoke choked the defenders. But not everything always went according to plan. In one of the campaigns against the Lusitanians in Spain, the enemy noticed the Romans in advance and opened fire with bows. Then, Legate Quintus Servilius Caepio ordered the use of an agger, a temporary earthen rampart, an embankment that soldiers created from sandbags and shields. Within minutes, they erected a shelter and continued the advance. This was an example of Roman engineering genius. They could reshape the very earth to shelter themselves from death. Engineering units were called fabri, craftsmen. These people did not fight, but the outcome of the battle depended precisely on them. They built bridges over moats, constructed ladders from spears, erected platforms so that infantry could approach the walls closely. Modern researchers find iron pins, stakes, and solidified lumps of tar at the sites of ancient battles, traces of these night operations. All of this proves the Romans did not need cumbersome siege engines when they could create them from readily available materials. During night attacks, signals were used, not visual but auditory. Legionaries distinguished 33 different trumpet sounds, each denoting an action: advance, retreat, regrouping. This language of metal and air replaced shouting. A signal error cost hundreds of lives. Therefore, trumpets were entrusted only to veterans, those who had served for 10 or more years. When the enemy began to panic, the Romans did not pursue the fleeing. They sealed off the city. The strategy was called Circulus Mortis, the Ring of Death. Soldiers surrounded the streets, blocking exits with shields, and methodically destroyed everything that moved. Modern historians compare this to special forces clearings: fast, without emotion, without shouting. Tacitus described how, after such battles, legionaries emerged silently, with soot on their faces and burns on their hands. No one celebrated the victory. They were simply given water and a new order: to march on. This cold ritual underscored the essence of Roman warfare: not emotion, but system. Archaeological findings in Iberia and Gaul confirm that many cities were destroyed precisely this way: quickly, in a single night, without long sieges. Layers of ash up to 30 centimeters thick, remnants of molten bronze, charred gate beams, traces of instantaneous and total destruction. And yet, behind this flawless mechanism lay one human trait: fear. Even legionaries accustomed to blood feared the darkness. Therefore, in each cohort there was one person carrying the eagle standard, the Aquilifer. He went first because his presence was considered a protection by the gods. To lose the eagle meant to lose honor. For its sake, soldiers rushed into fire, put the standard from the ashes, saved the symbol of the empire, even if the entire unit perished. The Romans believed that as long as the eagle was not lowered, the legion was alive. Therefore, their night assaults were not just a battle, it was a ritual of survival. Between flashes of flame and the whistling of arrows, they heard only one thing: the beating of their own hearts, coinciding with a comrade's step. And at that moment, the legion transformed into something more than an army. In the darkness, amidst burning walls, it became the very embodiment of Rome's will. When dawn rose over the smoking ruins, the Romans were already collecting trophies. Their steps clinked on the charred stones, as if on broken metal. The city, full of life just yesterday, now became a map on which the legate drew new lines of power, but dawn was still far away. The culmination of the assault, the moment when the legion turned into an avalanche. According to Caesar's accounts, it was in such moments that the outcome of entire wars was decided. He wrote that victory is brought not by strength, but by consistency. Every movement of the legion was calculated: a strike on the gates, smoke, circumvention, breaking the enemy's formation, and an instant breakthrough. This was called ruptura, a breakthrough of the defensive line, like a cracking glass that instantly turns into a network of destruction. At the moment of assault, command was transferred to the centurions. They knew their men by name, knew who would fall first, who would endure to the end. This was not an army of faceless individuals. It was a community bound by fear and honor. Polybius noted each centurion carried an iron rod, a vitis, in his breast, a symbol of authority and punishment. With it, he could strike a soldier who faltered, and by doing so, bring the formation back to life. Below the walls there was the smell of burning, tar and sweat. Warriors, their shields covered in soot, moved forward slowly but inevitably. This was the mechanics of death. Each step amounted to a new crack in the enemy's defense. When the first tower fell, the Romans did not rejoice. It was merely a signal for the next stage. Short swords, gladii, came into play. They were shorter than barbarian swords, but more deadly. In the narrowness of the streets, they decided the outcome. A thrust to the gut, a step aside, another thrust. Tacitus described this battle as a dance of iron, where every mistake cost a life. Legionaries trained daily precisely for these few minutes. They knew that in the chaos of the city, discipline was more important than strength. When the enemy retreated to the center, legionaries reformed into a manipulus, compact combat groups of 120 men. These were living gears, rotating around the commander's axis. Archaeological data from the destroyed city of Faleri showed that street battles lasted no more than 2 hours. Too fast for a siege, too organized for chaos. This was a deadly algorithm. The flames, ignited at the beginning, now devoured everything. Houses, warehouses, temples burned. Legionaries threw torches onto roofs because they knew smoke would drive out the enemy faster than a sword. Livy wrote that many cities surrendered when the air became impossible to breathe. This was the horror of Roman tactics. They did not merely destroy walls, they deprived the enemy of space to live. And those who tried to escape by fleeing encountered the outer ring, the vinculum. These were chains of warriors arrayed on the approaches. No one passed. Even children, according to Appian's testimony, did not escape their fate if the legate ordered urbs delenda est, the city must be destroyed. After this order, there was no turning back, no negotiations, no prisoners, only ashes. And yet, within this horror, a clear structure was maintained. When the fighting ended, the Romans stopped the looting. По уставу, третий час после взятия города посвящался инвентаризации. Считали оружие, складывали добычу, отмечали потери. Потери фиксировались точно. Каждая когорта докладывала, сколько людей выбыло. По сохранившимся надписям известно, что в среднем на одну взятую крепость приходилось до 5% погибших. Невероятно мало для того времени. Как им это удавалось? Ответ – в их сигналах и планировании. В момент штурма легат стоял на возвышении, наблюдая за ходом боя. Его сигналы передавались через трубы и флажки. Один неверный звук мог привести к катастрофе, поэтому каждый трубач проходил годы обучения. Этот точный, почти механический способ управления делал легион подобным живому механизму, где тысячи людей действовали как части одного тела. Когда все заканчивалось, над городом поднимался орел легиона. Он отражал пламя, словно солнце в аду. Этот миг фиксировали хронисты, писали в донесениях, вырезали на камнях. Символ того, что Рим снова утвердил свое господство. Но вместе с дымом поднимался и другой след, тот, что нельзя было увидеть. След в умах тех, кто выжил. Римляне знали, страх работает дольше меча. Город, сожженный ночью, становился легендой для соседей. Люди бежали, слухи множились, и иногда Риму больше не нужно было сражаться. Города сдавались еще до того, как увидели легион. Это и было их секретное оружие, не меч и не огонь, а память о них, когда даже сама тьма начинала казаться римской. После того, как грохот стихал и город превращался в серый пепел, легион не задерживался. Утром, когда дым еще застилал небо, звучал сигнал трубы «Марш». Ни молитв, ни речей, ни пафосных прощаний, они уходили как буря, оставляя за собой выжженные следы и тишину, которая была страшнее самого боя. Эта тишина, писал Тацит, поглощала даже эхо, но именно теперь, после разрушения, начиналось то, ради чего все было задумано – превращение ужаса в стратегию. Римляне знали, что уничтожение города не самоцель, это инструмент. Каждый пепел должен был работать на Рим. После штурма следовал этап систематического подчинения территории. В этот момент вступали в действие инженеры, писцы и чиновники. Они составляли карты, отмечали источники воды, дороги, поля. Из руин возводились новые опорные пункты, президия, гарнизоны, где оставляли часть солдат. Именно так Рим создавал сеть контроля. Там, где вчера был враг, завтра появлялся форт. Там, где невозможно было удерживать территорию, Рим оставлял предупреждение. The city was left destroyed, but with one wall untouched, so that everyone who passed by would see what happened to those who did not submit. Archaeologists found such places in Gaul and the Balkans, partially destroyed walls, even lines of conflagrations, but always traces of an orderly withdrawal. This was not chaos, but a theatrical set of fear. Sometimes legionaries left inscriptions on stones, short, almost cold-blooded. Vicit legio nona. The 9th legion conquered. not for memory but for psychological pressure. Anyone who saw this inscription understood resistance was futile. In these words resonated not pride, but a warning. After the battle, a debriefing began. Centurions compiled reports, noting bravery, casualties, disciplinary infractions. Those who violated order were punished even after victory. It is known that in one of Caesar's campaigns, 2 legionaries were executed for beginning to loot before the signal. The Romans did not allow war to destroy the system. On the contrary, war confirmed its robustness. This is precisely what distinguished the Roman army from all others. Barbarians conquered with passion, Rome with procedure. They transformed destruction into a process, almost a ritual. Every step, every phase had its own time. After the battle, weapon cleaning. After cleaning, provisions distribution. After that, formation. Even when the bodies of the enemies had not yet cooled, the legion was already ready for the next march. At this moment, the norms of disciplina militaris, military discipline, came into effect. This was not just obedience but an internal order brought to automatism. The centurion did not ask who was tired. He knew that everyone was tired. But Rome demanded they march. And they marched. 20 kilometers through ash, along still smoking roads, raising clouds of black dust in which the outlines of the burnt world disappeared. The Romans said, Roma non dormit. Rome does not sleep. This was not a metaphor but a reality. Even after night assaults, there was no concept of rest. Changing of guards, tent inspections, roster entries. Archaeological findings of clay tablets from Roman camps show everything was documented, even the consumption of oil for torches. In this lay their superhuman strength, in the ability to maintain order amidst chaos. But behind this order also lurked a shadow. Many legionaries did not live to the end of their service. Exhausted by marches, burns and smoke, they often died not in battle but from diseases. Caesar wrote, "Death from exhaustion is more terrible than the sword." And yet new recruits came because they knew, in the legion a person became part of the eternal. This belief that Rome lives in every step made them invincible, even after terrible nights when by torchlight they saw houses collapsing and women screaming. They did not consider themselves murderers. They considered themselves builders of order. In their eyes, cities did not die, they were purified. The psychological effect was monstrous. Already a few years after campaigns in Spain, cities surrendered without resistance at the mere news of a legion's approach. This was the very secret weapon about which ancient historians wrote. Not fire, not the sword, but the reputation of inevitability. Every new campaign began not with an attack, but with silence. The legion stood on the border, and the enemy already knew. If Rome came at night, nothing would remain of it tomorrow. This fear spread faster than troops. This is how the empire expanded without sieges, without long wars, only thanks to the memory of those who burned in a single night. But the most terrible thing was that this fear also affected the Romans themselves. They began to believe that they were invincible, and it was this very belief that one day turned against them. When Rome believed in its own invulnerability, a crack appeared within the system itself. It was invisible, like fatigue in a warrior's body. The legion still marched, still conquered, but within this perfect machine, doubts began to accumulate. Old centurions, who had been through dozens of campaigns, saw that discipline rested not on faith, but on fear. Fear, which previously turned outwards, now began to work against their own. After every victory, after every ash heap, conversations grew more frequent in the camps, whispered at night by the campfires. "How much longer?" the veterans asked. They saw how young recruits no longer understood the meaning of the campaigns. For them, war was turning into a craft without purpose, where every city was just another point on a list. Rome expanded, but its soul contracted. The first signs of this weariness were recorded by chroniclers of Augustus' time. Soldiers began to complain about long service, demanding rewards ahead of schedule. The empire, stretched to its limit, became dependent on constant war, like a body on a poison to which it had become accustomed. A legion without war lost its meaning. It did not know how to live in peace, and yet the rituals remained. march, formation, signals, reports. Only within them did the former energy disappear. Warriors carried out orders without conviction, like actors repeating a long memorized play. Cicero wrote, "Rome became a shadow of its triumph, and all that was honor became habit." At the borders, this was felt especially acutely. Barbarians no longer saw gods in the Romans, but only people tired of their own greatness. Some cities began to resist again, knowing the legion's eagle no longer carried the same fury as before. The Romans still won, but the price of victory became unbearable. When, in one of the campaigns near Hercula, warriors refused to go on a night assault, the legate ordered every 10th man to be executed. This ancient punishment, decimation, was rarely applied, but now it was used more and more frequently. Fear was restored through violence. However, fear ceased to inspire, it only destroyed from within. Historians of the later era wrote that it was then that the decay of Rome began. Not from barbarians, not from sieges, but from the loss of meaning. The mechanism continued to work, but without spirit. The iron remained strong, but the hand that held the sword trembled. And yet the tradition continued to live, like inertia. Even when the empire was falling apart at the seams, somewhere on the outskirts, in the dust of Syrian deserts or on the foggy shores of Britannia, a legion stood, forming up at dawn. And the trumpet sounded, the same sound as 100 years ago, when they went on assault. Perhaps this was the true strength of Rome, in the ability to continue even when meaning had long been lost. In the iron will that moved them through the centuries, forcing them to march forward until the very earth ended.